Joining me now from St. Louis is former police officer Reddit Hudson. He is board chairman of the Ethics Project. Here with me in Washington is Joe Madison. He is a talk show host and recently interviewed U.S. President Barack Obama. Joining us from Los Angeles is Bernard Parks. He is a former chief of police for the Los Angeles Police Department and is now an L.A. City Councilman. Also with us here in the studio is Grace Flores-Hughes. She's worked with the U.S. Justice Department and writes about Latino issues. Welcome to all of you to the show.
Thank you.
Let's start with you, Chief Parks, in Los Angeles. The U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder was very scathing in his criticism of what happened in Ferguson, and President Obama was also very critical. He's threatened to dismantle that force if reforms are not forthcoming. Now, you have been the chief of one of the biggest police forces in the country, the LAPD. What do you make of what is happening in the country?
I have to agree, and having read the report, that there are many things that are broken, and it's just not on the shoulders of the police department. It's the entire governing structure of the city. Those laws that are being criticized were not created by the police department. Certainly they enforced them unequally, but I think the entire system there requires it to be fixed, and you have to really reflect on whether the people that are currently in position who have been a part of the system are able to fix it.
Reddit Hudson, I want to play out a bit of part of what Eric Holder had to say. Let's watch this and then I have a question.
This investigation found a community that was deeply polarized, a community where deep distrust and hostility often characterized interactions between police and area residents, a community where local authorities consistently approached law enforcement not as a means for protecting public safety, but as a way to generate revenue.
Reddit, you have been a police officer in St. Louis, Missouri. Ferguson, of course, is a suburb of St. Louis. Were you shocked by what the Attorney General had to say?
Not at all. Myself and most of the colleagues that I know looked at the Department of Justice report as water is wet, acknowledging what we fully understand to be the case and has been the case for years: institutional racism and the lack of accountability in the criminal justice system generally here in the United States and in the law enforcement community in particular have been hurdles that the black community has tried to clear for generations. And I heard you say early on that new questions were raised by the shooting of the young man in Madison, Wisconsin. I would say that those are old questions, questions that have been in the black community for years, which go to why are people not held accountable when our civil rights and human rights and civil liberties are violated.
Right, I want to get to that question of accountability in just a moment. Grace, let me ask you, Latinos have also complained that they're being unfairly treated, targeted by police forces around the country. What is your assessment?
The statistics are not the best there are. Are Latinos stopped and searched more than their white counterparts? Yes. Data speaks to that, not just for African Americans, but for Hispanics as well. But unfortunately, the statistics get lost in the shuffle, in that, for example, a relative of mine recently died at the hands of the police. And the report came back that, well, he was drugged and so he died as a result. He was alive when he left his home with his family. I mean, when his family saw him. And when he got to once he got to the jail, he died there. Okay, so the report would come that he died as a result of, he was drugged. He was on drugs. He was alive when he left. He was bleeding. They should have taken him maybe to the hospital rather than to the jail. What happened to him between that and the jail? So you get a statistic that says, well, he died because he was drugged. Well, there's more to the story. So the statistics unfortunately get lost. So we don't have the best information out there to say, well, 80% of Hispanics that were stopped were killed and so forth. That's one of the things that obviously we have to work on, is on more accurate data. And I'm kind of a data freak anyway. So, and that would help, because there will be many that will say, well, there are not that many compared to disproportionately. Yes.
Right. Joe, we heard Reddit talk about accountability, very important issue. Are police acting with impunity here?
Well, I go back to what the two officers and former officers said. This is not something new. This, as a matter of fact, this is decades old. I remember before there were interstate highways, traveling from my hometown in Dayton, Ohio, to my grandfather's hometown in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and I bet you your panelists have had the same experience, maybe coming from Texas to California or wherever, that you slowed down when you got to a small town. Because why? And I always remember my grandmother saying, Jim, that was my grandfather, slow down, because you know those policemen are there, they're going to get you. They see an out-of-state tag, they see a black man driving a good car, and they're going to pull you over. And what you heard the Attorney General say, and this is why the numbers speak for themselves in Ferguson, is that it was the second largest revenue generated in that town. This was revenue producing. This was not about safety. It was about creating revenue. And having gone to school in St. Louis, I remember Forsyth and the other communities you couldn't drive through, you couldn't be caught out at night. The reality is, and the president said this on my show, don't stop at Ferguson. This is a problem nationwide.
Chief Parks, I mean, here we are hearing, of course, that this is not a new problem. This has been going on for decades. You were in Los Angeles. I mean, we remember the notorious incident more than 20 years ago when Rodney King was beaten by police and the riots that followed when those police officers were exonerated in court. Why hasn't anything been done at the police level and at city council level?
Well, I think things have been done. I just think that some of this is, and when you read the report about Ferguson, is overwhelming, and you realize that there's decades of issues that have not been addressed. But I think that you will find in some departments, particularly when I was the chief of LAPD, when you talk about accountability, we fired 140 police officers for mistreating the public or doing misconduct. You have to have an accountability program to let officers know that what's tolerated. You also have to have an accountability program to make sure the public knows that you take their grievances seriously. If those things are not in play, you will find that officers believe that they, in some instances, call it that they're working and doing God's work, and they have an immunity as it relates to mistreating the public. You cannot tolerate that if you're in supervision and management, and if you allow it to go on, you will have things that will fester, just as they are in Ferguson, and then an incident will occur, and you will find that people will talk about these issues that occurred 20 years ago. You cannot tolerate that kind of activity, and anytime the public is being mistreated, not listened to, you're creating a system in which police officers will feel as though they can hide behind their badge or take advantage of the public.
And look at the difference between Ferguson's chief of police and Madison, Wisconsin's chief of police. Immediately, he went to the family. This is a tragedy. He acknowledged that. We're going to investigate this. This is not something we're going to hide. I think he handled it as best as he could. We should also point out, one incident just happened. A naked man in Atlanta,
that's right,
was shot by police officers. Now, where in the heck did he hide the gun? So we've got to understand that this is systemic. And for the mayor of Ferguson to wake up this morning and say that he didn't know this was going on, the head was rotten, and the whole body is systemic all the way down, from the court, from the mayor, the chief of police, and quite honestly, I think the Justice Department is probably going to have to do like they've done in other cities in St. Louis County, and your other guests can speak to that, is that they're going to probably have to dismantle that entire police department and take over the court system.
Reddit, is that going to be the solution, to dismantle these police departments completely, start from the ground up?
Hope so. I hope so. I hope that the Ferguson Police Department is completely disbanded. The same thing has been done, as Joe just alluded to, in a police department that is immediately adjacent to the Ferguson community. It's called the Jennings Police Department. It was entirely disbanded because of consistent patterns of misconduct and abuse. And interestingly, Darren Wilson, the officer in the Ferguson shooting, came from the Jennings Police Department to the Ferguson Police Department. So I think that is a part of the remedy to this issue, because it is so systemic. But the institutional racism that really undergirds all of the problems that we're describing, I think is going to also be best attacked by officers themselves who function within these departments and who are part of the culture, particularly officers who've come from communities that are directly affected by this kind of conduct. Black officers, Hispanic and Latino, officers coming from marginalized communities have the best opportunity and the greatest responsibility to address that culture of acting with impunity and deciding who has constitutional rights and who doesn't, and always being able to fall back as a police officer to a narrative, a very safe narrative of heroism, sacrifice, and risk. I can throw that at you as a citizen anytime you challenge my behavior and say, how dare you ever question me? You don't know what my training is. You don't know what I face every day. Well, your fellow officer does. And I think that your fellow officers can make the distinction between how you police in this community versus how you police in other communities. And now we have a golden opportunity to do that that has been largely created by the young people that you saw in Ferguson and around the country who have rallied to the idea of justice and human rights for everybody.
Chief Parks, what do you make of that?
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot to that. And I think what was interesting in the report was that there were people that have been in Ferguson for a long period of time who actually viewed those that were protesting as outsiders and not carrying the voice of the true Ferguson residents. So I think it's a combination of a number of issues. I do think that, you know, in keeping in mind the safety of that community, there's going to have to be a wholesale change across the board in the police, within the administration, within their personnel department. I just thought it was interesting in monitoring Ferguson for these months. We've heard little or no voice from the elected officials. Where are they when all of these complaints were going on before the shooting? These are things that basically cry out that the system within the city has not served the public well. It also cries out for the activism that's going on now continues so that people can take control of their city and take an active role in decision making and voting. So a lot of things need to be done, and I don't think it could be done overnight. It's going to take a long while for there to be a credibility established within the city. You're just not going to be able to say, here's a new police department, a new police chief. You're going to have some long-term credibility issues develop. And I don't think you can just disband and not track where these officers might go in the future, right, because they may and probably taking some of the same views they have in Ferguson and just carry them on to a new jurisdiction.
We are going to have to take a short break right now. I'll come to you in a moment, Reddit, right after the break. We're going to have to take a break right now. And are police in the United States serving and protecting or mistreating minorities? That's our subject today. Please stay with us. You're watching The Heat.